Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Last week, the V-Dem Institute at the University of Gothenburg produced its annual report on the health of democracies, particularly how they're getting on vis-a-vis the rise of the authoritarian states. This report contains some fairly sobering conclusions. Number one, in many established democracies, we are losing many of the qualities of democracy. We see democracies, number two, turning into authoritarian states, and number three, the existing democracies like Russia and China are becoming harder, and in the case of Russia, turning into a totalitarian state. But the most astounding conclusion of V-Dem is that we are back to the 1989 situation. In other words, that all of the great gains that were achieved for democracy and freedom after the fall of communism have now largely been reversed. V-Dem calculates that 70% of the global population now live in autocracies. It says that last year, 33 countries became autocracies. Only 5 went in the opposite direction, and it calculates that today there are only 36 genuine democracies in the world, which is only 1/6 of the total. Even in the EU, the paragon of democratic standards and values, V-Dem says that 6 states are now backsliding towards a more authoritarian model. Surprisingly, and I'm not quite sure why, it includes Austria and Portugal in that category, in addition to the well-known cases, of course, of Hungary and Poland. Now, I might dispute sort of some of these conclusions. For example, I would argue that vis-a-vis 1989, we have made progress. No more apartheid in South Africa. Many of the military dictatorships elsewhere in the world have disappeared. Even in Central and Eastern Europe, despite the reversals, people are undoubtedly freer now than they were 30 years ago. Also, there is some good news in the report, in that COVID-19 has not had a long-term impact in terms of taking away our freedoms and subjecting us to mass surveillance or cancelling demonstrations in the way that we may have feared with the big daddy, big brother state just a couple of years ago. But V-Dem nonetheless does point to 4 particular factors which we see everywhere where democratic norms and standards are being eroded. Number one, we have more polarization. And we recognize this in many of our countries, that society is dividing into different sort of camps, whether based on values or based on culture or on issues. It's us against them. And the other side is not seen only as the opponent, but in fact as the enemy, which is trying to destroy the state or change our values or our national identity. And where you have that extreme polarization, for example, in the United States today, people vote only along party lines, and the only way of doing business is to have a majority, 51 against 49, because no coalitions are possible. And anybody who tries to be a bridge builder, like Liz Cheney recently in the United States, the Congresswoman for Wyoming, is immediately declared to be a traitor and is forced to stand for re-election against a loyal and orthodox rival. That's not good for democracy. Secondly, we have the culture of lies. In the UK this week, the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has not only become the first serving British Prime Minister to have broken the law, but also to have been seen to have misled Parliament. Some years ago, that would have been immediate dismissal or resignation. But today, there is a kind of sense that if leaders say that they are a different type of leader, somehow they should be allowed a different form of behavior. The lies destroy democracy very easily indeed, because they create a culture of cynicism about the truth, or a sense that every opinion is as valid as any other opinion, and voters no longer have to be confronted with difficult trade-offs, which is of course always the case in democracy, between things that are not easily compatible. For example, energy security versus low low energy bills. Thirdly, we have a culture of disinformation, which is basically making facts fit ideology rather than the other way round. The famous British economist John Maynard Keynes used to say, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? To which today the average populist voter would no doubt say, well, I just ignore the facts and carry on regardless. And finally, we have the decline of the traditional political party. I mean, we've seen in France just this past weekend with the first round of the presidential election, a situation where everybody now has gravitated towards the extremes. The extreme right garnered altogether 34% of the vote, compared to less than 28% for the centrist President Emmanuel Macron. The two traditional parties which have dominated French politics since the Second World War, the socialists and the Gaullists, together got less than 7%. The candidates lost their deposits. The extreme left got 22%, whereas the traditional left got less than 2%. And what we're seeing now is traditional parties where you have different groups, you have debates where parties are forced to renew not just their leaders, but their ideas occasionally to be relevant to the electorates, parties which are broad churches, which promote talent, but also sanction corruption and incompetence. Those parties are giving way to sort of rallies, which are really simply plebiscites around a charismatic single leader. You know, can anybody think who is number two in Marine Le Pen's national rally, or who is number two in Jean-Luc Mélenchon's La France Insoumise? These parties exist only to serve the purpose of the single leader. Now, as V-Dem rightly says, none of these trends, whether it be lies, disinformation, the collapse of the traditional party, polarization, can be easily reversed. And certainly, I'm not suggesting that we could go back to the good old days. It's clear that democracy has to adjust to society rather than society adjust to democracy. But how we renew our democracy for the social media age is going to be a challenge, not just incumbent upon the EU or governments, but something where we all have to play our part. So today, rather than offer solutions, I will simply make a promise to come back to this with some ideas how it could be done after our Easter break. But in the meantime, no I next week. We are taking an Easter break, and I take this opportunity to wish all of you a peaceful and happy Easter. Thank you for watching and listening. Engage with you in 2 weeks' time.